And I'm also ready to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Look, going to find people to work for your small business, it's just not an easy thing to do, right? I mean, running a small business in general is not an easy thing to do, but that's why LinkedIn Talent Solutions helps you. And that's why 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It isn't like any other job board, okay? It's got more than a billion people in their network. And that's why it's the best place to find candidates. They know what small businesses are doing. They know that they're wearing too many hats and they don't have the time and the resources to go through all of this like they need to. So with LinkedIn, that process is intuitive, it's quick, it's easy. They have you write your own job descriptions. They've got things like some filler questions for people to fill out so that they can get you the qualified candidates that you need. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So this is the second all-time meeting between the Baylor Bears and the Duke Blue Devils. And I think we all remember the first. Scott Drew was coaching for Baylor. Current Duke coach Jon Scheyer was running the point for the Blue Devils. It was in Houston at NRG Stadium back in March of 2010. It was the Elite Eight. Of course, that means winner goes to the Final Four. And it is, in some ways, a watershed moment in Baylor basketball history. And have they won the game, spoiler alert, they did not, it would have been probably the biggest win in the history of the program. Okay, so let's take you back there. Baylor's on this great run, first of 2 Elite Eight runs in 3 years for Scott Drew. They've got Lace Dunn, they've got Tweety Carter, they got Quincy Acey. They are stacked, really. And then it comes to number 1 seed Duke Blue Devils. This is a senior-laden team with guys you don't even remember. Jon Scheyer, Lance Thomas, Nolan Smith, Kyle Singler, the Plumlee brothers, who are still playing in the NBA, were coming off the bench for that Duke team. And at center, from Haddonfield, New Jersey, 7'1", Brian Zoubek. We'll come back to him later. Now, I got to admit something to you guys. Now, those of you who know me will already know this about me, but I was watching that game back in March of 2010 at my home in Rockland, Massachusetts, and I was watching with an intent eye. I was really into this game because I was the biggest Duke Blue Devil basketball fan you could have met at the time. My dad went to Duke. There's a reason you get the name Cameron, baby. I was obsessed with Duke basketball growing up. Every loss just cut into me so hard. I mean, if I had a post-game show on a Locked On Blue Devils when I was 12 years old, they would have sent the police to my house to make sure I hadn't committed suicide. Like, I was so into Duke basketball. And I will also say this, complete honesty, hand to the Bible here. That game in 2010 against Baylor was the lowest I had felt as a Duke fan during a game that Duke ended up winning. Like, I had no hope that they were going to win the game even into the second half. I mean, that Baylor team was running them off the court. That was a really good Duke team, especially defensively, but they were a great half-court team. And Baylor ran all over them. That was something that they just didn't run into, Duke. They go on to win the national championship. They beat the Cinderella story Butler, which was like the same kind of team. Half-court, slow, obviously very effective and very good defensively. But they did not face anyone other than Baylor that was going to exploit them. In fact, they got really lucky that in that same Elite Eight round, West Virginia, led by current Celtics coach Joe Mazzulla, ended up beating Kentucky, John Wall's Kentucky team, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, because I think that team could have beaten Duke by 15 points in the Final Four. But Baylor just didn't have it for a full 40 minutes, but they just played their guts out, man. And looking back on it now, just such an important game in the history of that program. Upstart Scott Drew. I mean, this is really the first time Scott Drew won a tournament game. You know, in 2008, they make the tournament for the first time in 20 years. The next year, they're back in the NIT and losing the final. And then all of a sudden, 2010, they're playing in front of a home crowd in Houston to go to the Final Four, to beat Mike Krzyzewski, almighty Duke. It would have been the biggest win in Baylor basketball history. And they had it. They had it until they didn't. The guy who was most critical to that Duke team in 2010, not the best player, but the most critical, was Brian Zoubek, 7'1" center who, for 3.5 seasons at Duke with plenty of playing time, didn't quite put it all together. He's never a great offensive player, back to the basket guy, and he could get bullied a little bit. But that second half of 2010, he became an offensive rebounding machine. And like I talked about earlier with their high volume three-point shooting, this was the first of those teams that really thrived on three-pointer. It's either going in or I'm going to miss it. And if I miss it, Brian Zoubek is going to get a rebound and kick it back out to someone to hit a three. They were devastating at that. And so with a couple minutes left in the game, under 5 minutes left, Quincy Acey's going to the basket. Brian Zoubek steps ahead of him. They make contact. They hit the floor. The call is a charge. Brian Zoubek stays in the game with 4 fouls, would have knocked him out. And whereas Baylor had a couple possession lead there, Duke goes on a 15-3 run to end the game and see the Bears out and go to the Final Four in Indianapolis and win the national championship. It's still one of the most bitter losses, if not the most bitter loss in Baylor men's basketball history. What that would have done for the program to go to the Final Four. Look, we've turned out okay. We've got a national championship more recently than they do, but it's devastating for Baylor fans. And if you ask the Baylor fans that were there or were watching that day, it still hurts for them to talk about it. I can hear it in their voice. I've talked to people about it. It is not dissimilar to the way my dad talks about the 1986 World Series Game 6 when the Red Sox had a 2-run lead and were 1 strike away from winning the World Series and inexplicably did not. That's what it sounds like. And at the time, I was like, yeah, baby, Duke, Final Four. That's what they do. They draw charges and they win games late. And I've looked back at the tape. And maybe it helps that I'm doing Locked On Baylor and I'm wearing a Baylor shirt and a Baylor hat in a Baylor room. But that was a charge, man. I've never said it in public. Sorry. That was a block. Thought I had you guys there for a second. That was a block. I've never said it in public. That was a block. 10 times out of 10. He's too late to get there. He just is. He's not the fleetest of foot. But that was a block. And Baylor still needs to finish the job in that game, but that's a huge difference. The X factor for this Duke team would have been out of the game. Baylor would have won that game. Absolutely. They would have gone to the Final Four. I don't know what happens there, but they would have gone to the Final Four for the first time since 1950. And we could have seen that national championship in 2014 or 2015, and then maybe again in 2021. That's how much this program would have ascended. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I have a feeling I know what you guys are going to say. Was it a block? Was it a charge? Would that have been the greatest win in Baylor history? Is Baylor going to win tonight? I'd love to know your score predictions down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe and share. I am so freaking excited for this game tonight. It is personal for me, and I know for a lot of you as well. Let's go out there and beat Duke and be a top 5 team again. And then we'll talk about it tomorrow with a full recap on Locked On Baylor.